Hi everyone! Tonight's video is on pollen and seeds. So the land plants we've discussed so far have been able to live on land due to their cuticle, stomata, roots, and vascular systems. But they've been very limited to moist environments because the male gamete was only capable of moving toward the female gamete by swimming. This left a lot of land that the plants were unable to inhabit. So two major adaptations evolved 360 million years ago to allow plants to live far from water. And these are pollen and seeds. So we're going to go through each one. First of all, let's talk about pollen. Pollen is the male gamete in a plant. And this was a huge adaptation that allowed plants to move far inland, away from moist environments. So in the form of pollen, the male gamete can reach the female gamete by blowing in the wind. Can you see this cloud of what looks like dust around these flowers? This actually is pollen that is being blown from the male parts of this plant, hoping to land on a female part of a plant in order to fertilize. So in this case, this pollen no longer needed to have water to swim. Anytime there was wind, the pollen grains could be blown far, far away and could fertilize any female gamete that they landed on. Plants with pollen don't need to be in a moist environment, and this opened up a huge part of land for plants to colonize. What about seeds? Seeds are actually embryonic plants that have a seed inside of a seed coat. So seeds allowed plants to wait until the conditions, such as moisture and temperature, were favorable for further development. So let's look at the parts of a seed. First of all, we're looking at a peanut, which is a seed. And the outer coat has a shell casing. Inside of that are two seeds. What you think of as peanuts are actually seeds for the peanut plants. That outer layer on the peanut that's got a plasticky, papery feel, that's a seed coat. And that seed coat is a protective coating. It allows the embryo that's inside the seed coat to wait until the conditions like temperature and water are appropriate for development. So if our seed falls off the plant to the ground, that seed can actually wait for rainy season to come if it falls on the ground in a dry summer. Or that seed can wait for the snow to melt until the temperature's right for further development. Let's look at what's inside the seed coat. So inside the seed coat, this is what a seed looks like. The largest part of the seed is what's called the endosperm, and that is this part out here. It contains nutrition for aerobic respiration. Think about it. Seeds are planted below ground. It's dark below ground. So a plant seed is not able to do photosynthesis until the plant has grown tall enough to get above ground. In order to make ATP to get that growth to go above ground, the plant has to use aerobic respiration. And so it needs carbohydrates as an energy source to make that ATP. For the baby plant, that comes from the endosperm. Do you remember doing the inheritance lab in class and we had some mutant white corn that didn't have chloroplast, so they were not able to do photosynthesis? Those plants were able to grow up until they got above ground and even continue growing above ground as long as there were still sugars left in the endosperm to fund aerobic respiration by the plant. Those plants died as soon as the sugar in the endosperm was gone because they had no chloroplasts and were unable to do photosynthesis. A typical plant would have chloroplasts, and once it gets above ground, the chloroplasts would be doing photosynthesis to help produce more ATP. Inside, in addition to the endosperm, is also this small structure down here at the bottom of each seed, and that's an embryo. It's a fertilized egg that's already begun development. If you look carefully, you can see the beginnings of some leaves and some root structures. It's in suspended animation. When the seed gets dropped to the ground, it's going to wait for the right moisture and temperature conditions until it starts to germinate or begin to grow and grow that plant above ground. So what's an example of a plant with a cuticle, a stomata, a vascular system with lignin, which again gives it rigidity so it can stay upright, roots, pollen, and seeds? Well, that's what we call our gymnosperm. And when you're thinking of gymnosperm, I want you to think of conifers or pine trees. There are other types of gymnosperm, but these are the most common and the most easily visible. Gymnosperm have two types of pine cones. They have male and female pine cones. The male pine cone has the pollen, and in the wind, this pollen can be blown, and so that it can get blown to a female pine cone. This bit of wind here is blowing this dust. This is pollen that's being blown off of a gymnosperm. And this is the cause of those seasonal allergies that you may be getting every spring. In the spring, you might also see a yellow powdery coating on a driveway or sidewalks. And again, that is the pollen that's being blown from the male pine cone on gymnosperm. The female pine cone is what actually has the seeds. So a female pine cone is what you think of as a pine cone. It's the large pine cone structure, and each one of these things called a scale has room for the seeds to grow on those. This stays very open, and then the male pollen can land on the initial embryo, and it can be fertilized, and it begins to develop into a seed. Once the female gamete is fertilized, the plant begins to develop. It's encased in the seed coat with the endosperm, and it can be waiting there until it is the correct conditions for the plant to begin to germinate and grow in the soil. So you should know that pollen is the male gamete, and it can reach the female gamete in dry condition by blowing in the wind. And you should know that this opened up a whole area of land that plants were not able to colonize as long as the male gamete had to swim to the female gamete. You should also know that seeds are plant embryos in suspended animation. You should know the parts of the seed and their function, and you should know that seeds allow plants to wait for favorable growth conditions. So that's all for tonight.